So, Michelle.
So, David.
I've got a riddle for you.
Okay, go.
You ready for this?
Yep.
Right, here we go. What does the CIA, the Mafia, the Vatican, including a dead Pope, the drug trade, George H.W. Bush, Afghanistan, the Soviet Union, and an Australian bank all have in common?
An operation.
Oh, bugger, you guessed it. All right, well, that very short episode. Thanks very much for listening. If you've got any questions, pop in at
because you've really piqued my interest. There's a lot going on there.
This is a request from a listener from Twitter at iSpy Podcast from a guy who calls himself Gladio Guy.
Oh.
Gladio is the Italian word for gladius, the Latin word for sword. Right?
Amazing.
The two-edged sword that all the legionnaires used to use. This is a story about possibly the greatest black op and one of the greatest conspiracy theories as well in the intelligence world. Today we're tackling the giant subject, Operation Gladio.
Let's tuck in. You're listening to I Spied, the jazz hands of Australian intelligence. Okay,
I know, I'm shaking my jazz hands like crazy, but it doesn't make a sound.
It's not a visual medium, though.
What's the sound of one jazz hand jazzing?
Hello and welcome to I Spy. My name is Michelle Stevenson. I'm here with David Callan. And thank you to a tweet request.
Yep.
We've got Operation Gladio today. Now, I have to say, when I started perusing the material around this, it's a lot.
Just a little.
And I thought, you know what, I'm going to leave that to the sad little man who likes to sit in his blanket fort and has nothing else to do because I've got a life. And the other thing, it's really, really fucking intriguing.
Oh.
Like, I mean, when you've got the Mafia, you've got the Vatican, you've got the CIA, I'm surprised they haven't done a movie.
Well, the problem with doing a movie like this is it's just too big.
Yes.
And there's so much going on. And there's so much that's been denied. There's so much that's been alleged.
Yes.
It really is crazy. And to Gladio Guy, who is the person on Twitter who brought the request and has waited for over a year for us to tackle it, I want to now extend my apologies for any mistakes I make, anything I miss, because, man, this is so dense.
It's pretty dense. So why don't we start with like a brief overview and then we'll start where it kind of kicks off.
Right. The brief overview is Operation Gladio was what's known as a stay-behind operation. So basically you leave troops behind in case you get invaded.
Now, there was a few countries involved in leaving troops behind.
Yeah. There's quite a few. Like all through Europe, there was this stay-behind operation, but it falls under Operation Gladio, which is the Italian one, because that's the one that was first revealed and really gained a lot of traction.
And this was off the back of World War II?
World War II. So 1948, everyone's going, yay, we've won. We beat the Nazis.
But we haven't won.
Oh, hang on a minute. We haven't won this. The Soviet Union.
Yes.
And what if they invade?
We haven't won hearts and minds quite yet.
We haven't won. But what if they invade? They've taken over Eastern Europe.
Yes.
I mean, we've kept all the really cool old buildings and nice stuff, and they've kept all the old crappy farmland and porn industry.
And what they saw happen with World War II was like that was kind of an offspring of World War I.
Yeah.
Because basically Germany were paying reparations and they were in poverty, and then a charismatic man named Hitler came along and said, we don't need to do this.
Yeah, we can do what we want.
Screw everyone else.
Guns, not butter.
Yes, let's just go.
Take the Sudetenland.
So I think what happened was the rest of the world kind of learned their lesson that, you know, what you can win a war, but you haven't really won the war.
You got to win the war. Yeah. And funnily enough, one of the characters in this, H.W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, W's father, he actually, when the Soviet Union collapsed, he turned around. He made a speech in America, and the way he started the speech was, it's taken us 50 years to win World War II.
Yeah.
Because essentially, as soon as World War II was over, it was USA versus Soviet Union. Now, the big thing they were worried about was when the Soviet invaded, they would come in through Italy, right? And so what they did is they're going to put in stay-behind troops. Now, there are two things they learnt with the stay-behind troops. One, there was an operation run by a young intelligence officer in the UK called Ian Fleming during World War II.
Ian Fleming?
Ian Fleming.
Who wrote James Bond.
Correct. There's a movie out at the moment called, what is it called? The Jigsaw Man, I think it is, which is about an operation he ran in World War II, and it's a brilliant movie. It's a really good one. But essentially, this was an operation to counter what was called Operation Felix.
So is this like Inception, like an operation within an operation?
Oh, mate, the operations in this. It's like, honestly, if you had this many operations, you're a senior citizen and you have no joints left in your body that are your own. Yep. Right? So essentially, the Germans had an idea to invade Spain, go down through Spain to take Gibraltar, because Gibraltar is the key to the Mediterranean.
Yep.
And if they held that, they've got all of southern Europe. So what happened was Ian Fleming came up with an operation to leave stay-behind troops, so leave caches of weapons all through Spain that Spanish resistance fighters could use.
Yep.
So they set that up. Of course, it never happened. Operation Felix never took place. Guess what Ian Fleming called this little operation that he ran?
What?
Operation GoldenEye.
No.
I kid you not.
Really?
It was Operation GoldenEye. Right, so what happens is they turn around and went, okay, Operation GoldenEye, that's a really effective thing. We never used it, but that's how we're going to run this. Now, who can we get to be the stay-behind troops in Italy? Let's think. Who hates communists? Fascists. So they basically turn around to all the old fascists from the Italian regime, and in Belgium, Germany, in a lot of these other European countries where they set up these stay-behind operations, they used fascists.
Now, what countries are we talking about here?
Belgium had one. Germany had one. Yeah, Germany and fascists. Not a good look.
Yeah.
Norway, Sweden. I think there might have been one in France.
Yep.
So this was being run by the USA and to a lesser extent by the UK. So MI6.
The CIA?
Oh, God, the CIA's fingerprints are all over it.
Okay.
All right. Now, the interesting thing is, how do we fund this? This is a big problem. It's got to be a black op. We can't actually it's a secret op. We can't fund it from our open budget. We've got to fund it from our black budget, but our black budget is restricted. There's not as much money in that as we'd like.
Is this where the church comes in and the mafia?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Right. So we need to be able to get this money into Italy.
And what better than the Catholic Church, who have been harboring millions of dollars the whole time?
Yep. So, they had the Vatican Bank, and the Vatican Bank was a part of a bank called
Pedophile Bank.
Pedophile Bank. No. Some of them aren't like that. The name of the bank is Banco Ambrosiano.
Okay.
Banco Ambrosiano. Right. So Banco Ambrosiano, through the Vatican Bank, was sending all these funds out. But then again, how do we get weapons to these guys and stuff like that?
Mafia.
Yeah, who smuggles things? The mafia. Right, so here we go. We've got organised crime.
And I have to say, what an unholy alliance.
Oh, that's the book. That's one of the books about it. But here's the other thing. Who are we going to get to run this? Because we've got the mafia here, we've got the Catholic Church here, we've got the CIA over here, but who on the ground is going to run this? I know. Let's get the Masons to run it.
Oh, my God, the Masons.
So there's a Masonic lodge involved.
I love the Masons. If you don't know anything about the Masons, it's very fascinating because when I was living in Canada, I remember there was a Masonic lodge near us, and the big thing was whether they were going to allow women to be members. It was like a massive thing. They never did.
You know it's a Masonic lodge when the goats go in, but they don't come out.
It's...
Secret handshakes.
They do have the secret handshake. Yeah. Like if you go for a job interview and it's been set up through the Masonic Lodge, you give the secret handshake and you're pretty much assured the job. It is crazy stuff.
There was always been, again.
The Simpsons do a good version of it.
There's the stonecutters. Yeah. But there was always allegations of Masonic influence in, the public service in Australia. But
it's kind of got that druid idea to it, right?
It's got the secret society thing. So we've got the Vatican, a fairly secret society. Yeah. Plus, we've got the Mafia, a fairly secret society. We have the Masonic Lodge, and the Masonic Lodge was Propaganda Duo.
Okay.
Propaganda, or P2 it used to be called.
Yeah.
It was actually declared illegal.
Yeah.
But it still kept operating in Italy, right? So a P2 was then declared illegal because it was getting involved in some really dodgy stuff, funnily enough. Hello. Operation Gladio.
So I just want to know how you involved the Mafia. You promised the money?
Well, you promised the money, but don't forget as well that the OSS and the SOE, so the SOE, which was the American, the Strategic Operations Executive, right? That became the CIA. That was the template for the CIA. Now, the SOE, when they were operating in Italy during World War II, so they were actually setting everything up for Operation Casuarina, which was the invasion of Italy in through Sicily and then across onto the mainland. So they were using the Mafia as resistance fighters. They were using the Cosa Nostra and the Mafia in Sicily and in southern Italy to basically prepare the ground for the troops to come on shore. Yeah. So this is the thing. They had contacts with the Mafia anyway. Truman was using the Vatican Bank to get money into Italy to repair the place for funding to rebuild. So there was all the pieces were in place. And then James Jesus Angleton, who was I love this, he was the head of counterintelligence operations for the CIA from 1954 to 1974. This guy sat in that chair so long, it basically was his ass, all right? And the problem is when you have somebody in intelligence that occupies a position for a long period of time, everything starts to stink of them and it starts taking on their personality. And he was fervently anti-communist. And this was the whole point. They put it in, not
Yes.
only were they using Gladio, the thing is Gladio morphed from being, we're going to have troops ready with cases of weapons and money and instructions. Like the Belgian operation, interestingly enough, they were given sealed boxes.
Right.
In those sealed boxes were gold coins and instructions, right? Where to meet, what to do, how to blow things up. They were trained by special forces, generally by the SAS and Green Berets.
Yep.
But the whole thing was for the Belgians went, no, we'll give them the weapons. The Belgian intelligence went, we'll arm them, but you just give them the money and the instructions. So the whole thing was there was all of this money and all of these arms floating around Europe.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing they realized was, and this is a great quote, it's called Strategia della Tensione. Strategia. This is, I'm actually doing the Italian handshake. Strategia della Tensione, the strategy of tension.
Yeah.
Now, the whole idea of the strategy of tension is it's designed to create a feeling of insecurity. And when you have a feeling of insecurity, you look to a strong government to give you a feeling of security. So what happened was there were suddenly these cooperative efforts to create insecurity. So suddenly there were these massive terrorist incidents going on around Europe. And some of them were right-wing terrorist events and some of them were left-wing terrorist events. But the whole thing was they all seemed to fall back towards Operation Gladio or the analogues of that in different countries.
So basically, once they've kind of curbed communism or the Cold War, it was then linked to the toppling of governments and genocide.
That happened in South America suddenly, and that was Operation Condor. But again, that involves another pope. In fact, it involves a young father, Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Jorge or George.
Yeah. No, it's Jorge.
It is Jorge.
It is Jorge.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio, also known as Pope Francis.
Oh.
Right. Now, he was, again, all alleged, but he's implicated in being involved in Operation Condor, which was a cooperative effort of the intelligence and security services of several South American countries to combat terrorism and subversion. Because of that, right-wing governments, and particularly despots and dictators, tortured, killed and imprisoned and basically disappeared tens upon thousands of people in the whole idea of let's combat communism. So an example is the Swiss. They had a stay-behind operation in their country. They had once it was all revealed, and we'll get to when it got revealed, but once it was all revealed, they had an inquiry into it, and they discovered that essentially what they were doing was they were doing everything they could to even stop democratically elected left-wing parties get into power.
Yeah, so I think the concern, right, with something like this is who is in control of it. And we find this all the time. What starts off with good intentions ends up being a disaster. Like perfect example is, Osama bin Laden, the CIA training him to
work in Afghanistan against the Russians.
Yes, absolutely.
And what happens is he then turns around and uses that against you.
Exactly. So it's like the blowback thing. So what always starts out as like good intentions always ends up not working out so well.
Well, the problem is anything like this can be corrupted and can be used as a tool by somebody else. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is this costs a lot of money. Now,
so who's still funding it?
How are we going to fund this? Well, one of the interesting things was it was called the jazz culture in America. In the jazz culture, they were generally cool and hip.
There's a lot of jazz hands.
And also very African-American.
Right.
And one of the things that was going on in the jazz culture was heroin. So the CIA suddenly went, hang on, why don't we get the Mafia to bring heroin in, we'll take our cut from the heroin, and we'll use that to fund our little operation in Italy / Belgium, Switzerland,
that
wherever.
worked out well for them, didn't it?
Right. Now, that's the thing was the whole idea. Again, these are all allegations. There's no proof anywhere because you know what? The CIA are not going to write this down. And if they did, it went through a shredder faster than any policy paper from the LNP. Right. So anyway, essentially what happened was they started getting involved in the drug trade. Now, interestingly enough, of course, there was the Golden Triangle. And of course, this was around about Vietnam time.
Yeah.
Suddenly the Golden Triangle at the top of Thailand, which is where a lot of heroin is grown, that became active and the CIA became very active in that area. Then suddenly Turkey came into the thing because they grow a lot of poppies over there. And then this little country called Afghanistan. Now, there was a guy by the name of Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Okay.
Take a deep breath and try to say that 3 times fast.
Yep, no.
Right. So anyway, he was a political advisor to Jimmy Carter and Lyndon Baines Johnson, and he was also a fervent anti-communist.
Right.
And he had a thing called the Afghanistan trap. if we can stir up enough trouble on the Afghanistan-Soviet border, the Soviets will go into Afghanistan. Afghanistan is, of course, the graveyard of empires, as we've discussed in an earlier episode. And what will happen is they'll get trapped in there. They'll have their own little Vietnam, and it will destroy them.
Yep.
How do we fund this? Let's get the Afghanis to start growing poppies, right? Yeah. So again, it's this drug trade thing.
But I just feel like it's not the best way.
No, well,
just like it's not the best way. But I mean, this is also from a country that pretty much is drugging their whole nation, and with fentanyl, and that's totally fine. And most people are dying from it, but that's also totally fine.
I mean, this is a country that basically is using opioids as a sedative for the entire planet.
Yes.
And what's really fascinating when you go through all of this is the conspiracy theory is so rich. It's so deep. I mean,
they would have a field day with this.
There was an Italian guy by the name of Calvi who was a member of the P2 Masonic Lodge.
Yeah.
Right? He was involved in the Banco Ambrosiano. That bank was collapsing. The Vatican Bank was involved. There's all this stuff going on with the Masonic Lodge. He was up for charges for corruption, and he disappeared to London. Right. He escaped Italy using a false passport and hiring a private plane in Zurich, flew to London, and was found hanging from Blackfriars Bridge by his neck from a scaffold under there, found by a postman one morning. Now, the whole thing was, a lot of the theorists go, that's proof that he was involved in the whole Operation Gladio scam, because Blackfriars Bridge, that's what the Masonic Lodge called the P2 Lodge. They were the Blackfriars.
Oh, really?
Right. So one.
Well, that's
two,
cool.
Wait for it gets better. When you're killed if a Masonic Lodge wants to take you out, it has to involve tidal water. So he was hanging above the Thames River, which is a tidal estuary. The first inquiry said it was suicide.
Yeah.
And then his family actually hired a QC in the UK who reopened the investigation, and it's now still an open finding, so that no one knows how this guy died.
Right.
Because basically the QC went, how did he get out there and hang himself? It's impossible.
Yeah.
Right. There was no way a man could physically hang himself from that bridge in that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's all of this mad conspiracy going on. And also people say this is pure evidence, cut and dry, black and white, of the New World Order.
Yep.
Right. In fact, one of the Gladio groups in Italy was called Ordine Nuovo, New Order.
Right.
Not the band, which I do like.
I do like the band. Now, what's so interesting about this is when we talk about conspiracy theories and the really lame ones that we have nowadays. I mean, like the whole thing about the 5G towers.
Yeah,
And then the fact that, we've got Bill Gates who's like making sure that everyone's being microchipped.
I am so sick of having to delete the new U2 album from my brain because of that chip that was put in me when I got my Pfizer injection.
Totally. But when we think about conspiracy theories, there's what we have today.
Yeah.
But then there's something like this.
Yeah.
This is good.
Now, the other thing about this,
and there's stuff in that you can find that you can legitimately go, yeah, that's totally believable.
Yeah, look, this is the thing. I mean, a good conspiracy theory needs to be plausible.
Yes.
Right?
And it's totally plausible.
But also, there are so many moving parts in this.
Yeah.
Right? We haven't mentioned Pope John Paul I.
Okay, what did he do?
Pope John Paul I. He was the very short-lived pope. He only lasted for about 30 days.
What did he do?
He died.
Okay.
In his bed. In his bedroom. Perfectly healthy. He was sitting there and he'd announced to the Curia that I'm thinking of having an inquiry into the Vatican Bank because there seems to be a bit of dodgy stuff going on here.
Then dead.
Dead within days. Now, the interesting thing was his 2IC or his assistant or whatever, who was a cardinal, right, basically went into the room and took a look and went, he's dead. Yep, he's dead. Quick. Everyone get out, get him to the mortuary and let's start embalming him straight away. So there was no coroner's report on it. But also the Pope's glasses and notebook went missing. Now, he always had a notebook by his bed. That book went missing and his glasses went missing. Now, one of the things, what the conspiracy theory was, there was a contact poison placed on the bridge of his glasses. He put it on his nose and that contact poison seeped through his skin, went up into his eyes, killed him, right? But of course, once you put embalming fluid into a body, there's no way you can trace toxins because it's full of embalming fluid, right? So there was that little thing. Now, did that happen? It could have.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. The Catholic Church is far from innocent.
Well, and also, let's be honest, when it comes to popes and poisoning, the Vatican and the Italians have form.
Yes.
All you have to do is look at the Borgias.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was, there's all of these there's kidnappings, there's guys in. One of the bankers involved with Banco Ambrosiano, he died in his prison cell when he drank a cup of coffee that just happened to have cyanide in it.
Just accidentally.
How did get his hands on cyanide?
Who knows?
Right. So there's a lot of these sort of interesting things. Now,
So how did it end?
Well,
or has it?
right, okay. Here's
Like
the
that's
thing.
kind of like, is it still something going on?
In 1974, it was first revealed. And I think it was, I'm really struggling to remember.
The year of my birth.
A
lot of great
your
things.
fault.
It was my fault.
Right.
I mean, maybe I'm involved.
Yeah, you are. You are the second generation of Operation Gladio. So what happened was it was revealed in Italy. I think it was actually a mafia guy basically blew the lid on it.
Yep.
And then wound up in prison. And I think he died there. Everyone seems to die in prison in Italy. But then in November 1990, NATO was accused of being involved in Operation Gladio. And NATO would have been. I mean, it's right up NATO's alley. It's a military operation, essentially. It's a clandestine military intelligence operation. Right. Anyway, they basically got up and said, we understand it happened. It had nothing to do with us. Right. And that was the secretary, the deputy or the head of NATO said, nothing to do with us. And then the very next day went, maybe a bit. We might have known about it. We might have been involved, but not really. And all of that other stuff, don't be crazy. And then everyone looked at the CIA who went, wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. Yeah. Because that's how the CIA talk.
Yeah, that's weird.
Right. So essentially it was all revealed in 1990. And then a lot of countries basically went, let's have an inquiry into this. So Switzerland did it. Italy, it was huge, where the Prime Minister got up and basically condemned it, said we're stopping it. This all halts.
So it was still going in the 90s.
Oh, God, yeah. And I mean, the funny thing about it is there's no real way for us to say, yep, it's done.
Right. Because there's no real way to know it ever existed.
Exactly. But the thing that comes down to it, and we haven't mentioned the Australian Bank. I remember there was the Australian Bank thing.
Okay.
That was the Nugan Bank, this very famous bank back in the 80s, the 80s where you could, get money off, you literally pluck it off a tree.
There was a lot of banks.
A lot of money swirling around and not a lot of regulation around it. Nugan was this low interest, high loan bank. So you
loan sharks.
You could, get $30 million at 3%.
Right.
Stupid interest rates and that sort of stuff. Essentially, everyone just went, this is essentially a laundry. This is a clearinghouse for drug cartels, the whole ball of wax.
Yep.
One of the partners, I think it was either Nugan or Hand, of course, one of them was found dead in his car out in Western Sydney. He'd been shot through the head with a 22. He had a 22 rifle in his car with him, in his lap.
Yep.
The whole thinking he couldn't reach the trigger if it was under his chin.
No.
Right. So that was a questionable thing. And the other thing was the assistant director of the CIA's business card was found in his pocket. Right. Oh. Now, here's the thing. Who leaves their business card on a body if they kill them? Or at least who leaves their boss's business card in someone's pocket? But also, why would the CIA be dealing with Nugan Bank?
Yeah.
Right. So there are all of these weird, twisted sort of things involved in this conspiracy theory. I have my own theory behind it.
Okay, what's yours?
Personally, I think it was probably a legitimate operation. The idea of leaving stay-behind units or stay-behind capacity in a country is very feasible. Yep. And when you think about it, at the time, through the 50s and 60s, particularly the 60s, the paranoia of the Cold War, it's a really big deal, right? They really wanted to know that if the Soviet Union finally do get up and go, we're going to invade you, this massive behemoth of an army that is unstoppable, unless, of course, you go to Ukraine and you've got a comedian running your country who goes, I don't think so, we're going to resist, right? There was that real paranoia.
And they did essentially beat communism with hearts and minds. Like it was Americanization that kind of like saw the fall of a lot of this.
It was an economic war. Like essentially they beat them with economics simply by...
Yeah, but also, a lot of Russia kind of was like, oh yeah, I want McDonald's. Oh yeah, I like Levi's. Oh yeah, Coca-Cola's great.
My mother and my uncle and his partner went to Moscow, and both my uncle and his partner were constantly being asked by people, how much do you want for your jeans?
Yes.
Right, because they were wearing Levi's.
Yeah. So it's like this whole idea of Americanization really kind of swept through, and that's kind of what changed the whole perception of the communist ideal.
The big thing was Elton John going to Russia. There's a great documentary about his tour of Russia and how it was just him and a percussionist. He wasn't allowed to take anyone else because it was so paranoid in there. Now, here's the thing. Once you've got an operation this big with this many moving parts in it, man, the hole where the money falls through gets wider and wider, and you will have guys sitting around that hole waiting for it. right? And I think a lot of what happened was, again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think the problem was these people saw the advantage and they could make a lot of money out of being involved with this. Now, you've got to make a deal with the devil, and that devil happened to be the Mafia and the Vatican. Who knows? There's two sides of the one coin. But the whole thing was, I think that this was a legitimate operation that got so out of control that they lost sight of it. They really lost sight of what was going on. The stuff that was going on in South America to prevent socialist movements in countries, people were being murdered in the streets, right? The fact that they'd set up these organizations and there were terrorist acts that were going on that could legitimately be linked to those stay-behind units. It's like it just became something out of control.
Yep.
But the great thing was, going with the strategy of tension, if you let it get out of control, the people are going to lean towards the stronger government. They're going to lean towards the strong man. They're going to lean towards the government that is fighting these terrible leftists that are blowing up trains in the streets, all that sort of stuff. So that to me is the way it works. I mean, the great quote is from James Jesus Angleton. Deception is a state of mind and the mind of the state. Right. So essentially his attitude towards it was, we're lying to you, but you know what? That's what we do. And if you believe the lie, more fool you. So that's what I think with Operation Gladio. And Gladio Guy, I'm really happy if you get in contact with me at iSpy Podcast and Peter. If you want to talk to me.
You can try that again at iSpy Podcast.
On Twitter. I say it really quickly because everyone knows when I go, hang on.
Yeah, but not everyone knows. Anyway, at iSpy Podcast on Twitter, that's how you say it.
Yeah.
Please join the conversation.
Please do, because the whole thing is, I know that there are people out there that are going to go, hang on a minute, you forgot this. And I'm happy to say, forgot it. I probably didn't know it. It is, honestly, I've listened to 3 books, read so many documents on, and I still don't have it all together.
So glad you did it because I actually have things to do with my life.
Well, it's, of course you've got things to do. You're an important person and I'm a little blanket fort troll.
You are a blanket fort troll.
So look, bottom line is,
done.
Here's the thing, and this is really important, and it's a question that someone raised on our Twitter account at iSpy Podcast on Twitter.
Yeah.
See, that's how you say it.
Yeah.
And it was a question of, hang on, are spies exempt from the law? And I'm going to answer that question for that listener because you know what? There's a couple of really good answers to it. And I was quite shocked when I read one of them.
Okay.
Right? So the whole thing is Operation Gladio, black op to the max.
Yes.
Was it as conspiracy driven and crazy? Maybe. And that's literally all anyone could say. It's nuts. It's just nuts.
It's great.
Look at me. I'm doing my hand thing and everything.
It's like jazz hands.
Woo! Yeah, well, and it was the drug trade that started it all.
Jazz hands.
Jazz hands.